it's just been an amazing morning. Can't wait to hear what's up with you and what you want to talk about today.
Have you seen the Elon Musk podcast interview?
No.
Oh, it's interesting.
No.
Interesting thing to watch. So, I mean, I watch a lot of Joe Rogan's podcasts, but I think they're a lot better visually because you see the response of people, and he's had some good ones recently. Jordan Peterson has been on there. That was a fantastic one. Sam Harris, of course, has been on there. Oh, have you seen the Jordan Peterson Sam Harris debates at all?
Not yet.
Okay.
No. How are those?
They're great. Very interesting. I mean, there's two of them because they did 2 separate days. But I feel like, I don't know. When Sam Harris speaks, I can't understand what he's saying. Whereas with Jordan Peterson, it's like much more coherent and clear, and you kind of know where he is. But they end up having a very rich discussion. But anyway, in the Elon Musk interview, I'm only maybe 30 minutes in. It's a 2.5-hour thing. So, but he's just an interesting guy in terms of his mannerisms and the way that he is. But at one point they started talking about, and I thought of you because of the network effects with Google and Facebook and Instagram, and he said something in there which just kind of hit me, which was those network effect sort of platforms succeed to the extent that they end up resonating with our limbic system. Like they're just a projection of our limbic system, basically. And he was going into artificial intelligence a lot. And
who said that?
Elon Musk said.
Oh, yeah.
And he just talks a lot about how he's he's been warning everyone about artificial intelligence because it could be really great or it could be really bad, and no one is regulating it. And I don't know, it just started sparking ideas and different thoughts, related to a lot of the things that you touch on in your newsletters. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know, I just thought I'd throw that out.
I think all of the concern about artificial intelligence is completely misdirected. So artificial intelligence doesn't exist at all. Like zero, okay? What we have is really, really, really effective algorithms that can basically only do what they're told. Even a Go algorithm can only learn Go if it's told to learn Go, and it has to be specifically set up to do so. There is zero generalized intelligence in computers at all. And there won't be until somebody solves the evolution prize. Or consciousness, which I think is the same thing. I think it's the same question. I might be wrong, okay? So like the machines are in the present form that computers take, the machines are never going to wake up, ever. And you can take that to the bank. So that's not going to happen. Here's the real problem. The real problem is that somebody always owns the machine. And the machines are owned by a very, very, very small number of people. And you don't know what their agenda is, but there is one. That's the problem. And hey, everybody, the machines are going to wake up. That's a distraction from the fact that the people that own machines can turn the whole world into a tyranny really easily. And it's already happening in China, big time. Big time, okay? So China has face recognition everywhere, and they're tracking everybody. And I have a friend who 2 months ago, He's sitting in church with 100 people in church in China. 40 police officers come in and they shut the whole place down. They fined the pastor $10,000 or something, some huge amount of money. I forget how much money. And they said, you don't have a license to be meeting here. This is illegal. And they busted the whole thing up. Okay. China, and the premier of China just got rid of term limits. And it's turning into a dictatorship. That's what you need to be concerned about. All this stuff about it, it's not going to happen. Not until the fundamental definition of a computer completely changes. It will never happen with Boolean logic, ever.
Interesting.
Ever.
So basically,
so that's and go ahead.
I was saying, so basically what it does is it just amplifies whatever underlying intentions or characteristics that a person or a state or et cetera has.
Yes, that's all technology does. It amplifies the dictator. Okay. So the real question is, what social engineering are the owners of Google, Apple, Facebook, and YouTube, and Amazon doing? That's the question.
Yeah.
Now, nobody needs to tell you the sacred cows and et cetera of Silicon Valley. I mean, if you pay attention, you know who they crucify and who they accept, right? Like the guy that founded Mozilla voted against Proposition 8 or whatever the gay marriage thing was, and he just basically got vomited out. Like, no, you're not entitled to that opinion, right? So there's certain things like they just won't tolerate. Now, like how draconian are they? And like how, like here, great question. How biased is the Facebook algorithms or any other algorithms in favor of left-leaning ideas as opposed to right-leaning ideas? I don't know. I know the press is extremely biased. We all know that, but so I just think all this AI utopia stuff, and you have to notice. Here's a book you should read. You should read a book called. Let me make sure I get the title right. It's by George Gilder. It just came out. It's called Life After Google: The Fall of Big Data and the Rise of the Blockchain Economy. So one of the things that he talks about
Am I taking you over?
No, we're okay because I don't have an appointment. So, and in fact, I want to write a newsletter about this. So hey, we're recording and like I can use this. So this whole singularity thing, like you know what that is, right? We're all gonna upload ourselves into the internet and live forever. So you're like, well, when are computers going to be smarter than humans and all that? That can keeps getting kicked down the road. Okay? I mean, 10 years ago, it was like 2029. Now it's like 2049. It's always like just far away enough that we can fantasize about it, but not like really actually do anything about it. Okay. I think the singularity, it's just an atheist rapture story. That's all it is. You know, the Christians are going to be caught up with Jesus in the cloud. The atheists are going to caught up in the cloud. Like it's the same at a mythological level. It's the exact same story. Okay. It's no different. Okay. And it's based on Okay, so I just came back from Dublin. I went to a conference called What is Life? And that is the title of a book and a series of lectures by Erwin Schrödinger, who is a very famous physicist. He was a pioneer of quantum mechanics. And Schrödinger gave these talks in 1943 called What is Life? And the talks in the book, it's a little book. It's like 60 pages or something. And it's a book of questions, not a book of answers. It's basically a physicist looking at biology saying, so what is this? And the answer is nobody knows. Like if you ask 100 biologists to define life, you will get 100 answers. I kid you not, right? And so they had this conference, and it was the 75th anniversary, and the last time they did it was 25 years ago. So like, so they pulled out all the stops. There were 6 Nobel Prize winners at this conference. I talked to like 4 of them. One of them was James Watson, who discovered DNA. I got a picture with him.
Oh, wow.
It's on the Evolution 2.0 Facebook page. Got a picture with James Watson. By the way, he said, well, I don't think they'll ever discover where the genetic code came from. I'm like, well, I think they might. So anyway, so there was all these talks. Several of them were about AI, and there was so one of the things that came up in one of the talks was there was a major meeting at Dartmouth in the late 50s. And it was like defining the parameters of AI. And they did a very good job. Like they really like defined the landscape very effectively. And they made all these predictions. And their predictions were wildly optimistic. Like how much, they were like, well, we're going to have solved blah, blah, blah by the 1960s or the 1970s. And how far they actually got by then was just light years behind what they predicted. Well, so the reason I brought up the What is Life conference is I spent 2 days with all these top scientists in the world. They still can't define it. Now, how are you going to upload something into the cloud that you can't even define? and look, the most fundamental problem of all of it is conscious experience. I am having a conscious experience inside my body and my head, and so are you. The only thing I can know for sure is that I'm having one.
Right.
I infer, but cannot prove that you're having one, and that your dog's having one, and that your cat's having one, right?
Yeah.
But every dog owner I know thinks that their dog is having a conscious experience just like we are, right?
Yeah.
I believe it, okay? I'm guessing that all living things are having a conscious experience. Nobody has any idea what it actually is. Now, there was some great talks about neuroscience. So, for example, there's this hot thing in neuroscience called optogenetics. Okay, and here's what it is. So, I might butcher this a little bit, but it's something like this. So they can take a super, super, super thin probe. They can attach a photofluorescent bacterium to the end of it. Okay, so like fireflies, the back end of a firefly that glows.
Yeah.
It's symbiotic bacteria that have uh, that glow, and when they're stimulated a certain way, that's where that comes from. Okay, so it's bacteria living inside the firefly, and there's a YouTube video called "How Bacteria Talk" by Bonnie Bassler. It's my favorite TED Talk, and she talks about fluorescent bacteria in, I think, jellyfish, and it's really sophisticated. Well, anyway, you take one of these bacteria, put them at the end of a probe, and you can put it right next to a single neuron, and you can stimulate the bacteria to glow, and it will cause the neuron to fire.
Wow.
So it is now possible to trigger memories and reactions on a single neuron level. And then, like, so they can put a mouse in a cage, and they can shock the mouse, and then they can figure out which neuron carries the memory and use optogenetics to stimulate the neuron in the mouse and recreate the experience of the electric shock in the mouse. They can do that now. Okay, it's kind of scary. So what they're now experimenting with is the neurological correlates of consciousness. But they still don't know what consciousness is or where it comes from. Totally opaque. We don't know. And it has resisted analysis for a century. There's a philosopher named David Chalmers. He calls it the hard problem of consciousness. Well, until somebody solves this, nobody's going to get uploaded into the internet. Now, let's say we did upload ourselves into the internet. Any Google or Facebook advertiser knows what hell you would have to put up with, because somebody owns this, and you have to pay rent, and there's rules, and you can get banned, and you can get kicked off, right? Like, okay, this is a computer platform, people, okay, and they're all owned by people, and they all have these rules, right? Like, what could a Google advertiser who's been Google slapped or banned tell you about living your life on somebody else's computer? Nobody friggin' talks about this. Okay? So we're going to live in the cloud, okay? And who controls the advertising? Okay, they own your brain, they have direct access to your brain, and you think somebody's like not gonna manipulate it for political purposes or ideological purposes or for shopping malls or whatever? Are you kidding? And then I heard a talk by a lady about a month and a half ago at the ASA conference. It was great. She goes, how do you notice that these guys with fantasies about living in the cloud, all they seem to want to do in the cloud is think about stuff and have sex? Like, do they do anything else? You know, and then they write these books, and they talk about how, well, you know, there's going to be some people who prefer to remain on Earth and be Luddites and stay behind, but then there's going to be the rest of us who decide to move forward and evolve into the future. Like, right. Oh, like the arrogance. Like, okay, if you lost an eye, none of these people could give you a new eye if their life depended. You could put machine guns, you could line up their family, say, okay, you give this guy a new eye or we're going to kill your wife and children. They couldn't do it to save their life. But they're going to recreate the whole entire human experience in the cloud? Total nonsense. Total bullshit. Not going to happen. Okay? Not unless Not unless somebody figures out consciousness and recreates it. Frankly, I think you'd have to, unless somebody can create a cell from scratch without using any borrowed parts, forget it. You know, Craig Venter, he's as close as anybody's ever come to creating a cell. Okay. And what he did was he replaced the genome of a bacterium and then reprogrammed the thing, okay, and it cost him $40 million to do it, okay? And he was talking about this one time, and he said, no, a ribosome is the part of a cell that reads RNA and turns it into amino acids. It's basically the heart of genetics is a ribosome. He was talking about, you know, using ribosomes that are already in the cell, which he has to. And he goes, well, you know, like the ribosome is like a Ferrari. You know, it's like an exquisite piece of machinery. And one of the people at the Dublin conference was Ada Yonat, and I was talking to her about being a prize for the Evolution 2.0, talking about being a judge about a year ago. And she was there, and she's a world expert on the ribosome, and her Nobel Prize has something to do with the ribosome. And you know, and she was showing all these slides about, like, it's basically an enzyme, and it's got 57 proteins, and however many enzymes. It's just amazing piece of machinery, and we don't even know how to build that, right? So, oh my goodness, we are not anywhere near as far in technological evolution as we like to tell ourselves that we are. And then on top of that, we are also not as morally and ethically evolved as we like to tell ourselves we are either. And so what all of this does is it covers up the fact that you have people manning the controls who, you know, many of whom, they've never read Aristotle, they've never read Paradise Lost or Moses or Jeremiah or Jesus or, you know, Buddha, or like they haven't even mastered the old literature yet. Like, they don't even understand what the real issues are in life in the first place, and they're gonna like create a new philosophy. Man, it is serious hubris. So I mean, I'm on a big rant here right now, and apologize if I'm getting a little too edgy, but a lot of these people just have their head up their backside.
Yeah, well,
but it doesn't keep them from making mistakes.
Yeah, it reminds me of in the talk with Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris. Eventually, I just came to the conclusion that Sam Harris is so caught up in how things should be that he can't see how things are, right? And like you said, his operating system or philosophy is not grounded in, you know, the fundamental whatever that fabric is that seems to be somewhat consistent across, you know, humans physiologically, and that has manifested in these myths in various forms, right? And so, yeah, it seems like, you know, there needs to be, whoever is going to be in charge of the wheels should have a grounding in the things that have, you know, been around for 2,000 years, not 2 or 3 years.
Right. Well, you know, Jordan Peterson is absolutely right that Sam Harris has confused our ability to measure things with our ability to prioritize. Okay, so what the new atheists and people like Sam Harris want is they want a world where we have measured everything and we have driven all the mythology out, and that we are making all of our decisions based on facts. Okay, that's what they want, and that's laudable in a certain sense, and I get it. And I especially get it because I'm an electrical engineer, and electrical engineering is extremely precise, right? It might be the most precise kind of engineering that there is. Well, here's the problem. So let's say that we can measure everything. We can measure your pain receptors, and we can measure your neurons, and we could get all the charts and graphs that you could ever want, right? We don't have access to your lived conscious experience, but we have access to all of the correlates, okay? So we're going to put them all in the spreadsheet. Well, here's the problem. Which column of the spreadsheet are you going to optimize by?
Yeah, or even more important, what is the you know, the lens or the operating system through which you make that decision, right?
Right. Okay. And those are moral and ethical, and they can't be reduced to math. Okay. And look, everybody knows what it's like when you try to reduce morality to math. It's just that most of people haven't thought of it this way. Every time somebody does something hurtful or harmful to somebody else, and then they pass a law, right? So 2008 crash, so they pass Sarbanes-Oxley. Well, let's make the 1,700-page book of rules that are going to prevent a 2008 crash, and all you end up with is a bunch of friggin' bureaucracy and really smart criminals figuring out loopholes.
Yeah.
And then you tie all this, the honest people's arms are all tied behind their back because they have to jump through 900 hoops just to like buy pens and pencils, right? That's what happens when you take an algorithmic approach to a fundamentally humanistic problem, right? Now, as far as I'm concerned, the best solution that was ever offered by anybody was love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. Somebody asked Jesus, like, what are the greatest commandments? He says, there they are. Now, what does that mean? That means you first and foremost devote yourself to the highest possible conception of good that you can muster, and you love the other person as much as yourself. And if you can do those two things, then you don't have to spend 8 years trying to argue about how to sort the spreadsheet. Well, are we loving the people, and are we committing ourselves to the highest possible ideals? I don't think Sam Harris is ever going to improve on that. Frankly, he hates it. He totally rejects the first premise entirely, which is actually a problem because then there is no highest good. And then you're just you become a technocrat. You're like, well, you know, if we get good enough at measuring things, we're eventually going to figure all this out. It's like, well, it's not about measurement. It's about love. And love is not a measurement.
Well, the good news with that, what I like about that approach is that it's also physiologically rooted to a degree, right? In a tribal element of, look, I need to do what's best for the tribe so that, you know, because that makes more people likely to want me on the team, and, you know, nature is selecting for leadership, right? And so it's just a matter of how, it's more a matter of perspective. Okay, my tribe is no longer 100 people, but you view the tribe as the world, right? But
well, right, and the good Samaritan story redefines the tribe, right? So Jesus tells a story about, well, there was like a priest and a Levite and a somebody else, and they all walked down the road, and there was a man who got beat up, and they all walked by, and then the Samaritan came and picked him up, took him to the hospital, and paid the bill, and then came back to check on him. Well, Samaritans were like, they were the most reviled people, right? And in the story, the guy from the wrong tribe is the guy that helps the guy in need. And then Jesus says, who is the neighbor? And somebody says, the person who helped him. And he says, yes, you got that right. Okay. So like the highest view is the whole world is the tribe. Like any suffering human being is a member of your tribe, right? And so you're right. We have these stories, of altruism and like sacrificing for the greater good. But in the ancient world, you would only do that within your tribe. And of course, we all have the tendency to lapse into that. But the message is, no, like that boundary shouldn't be restricted to anybody. And I think those ideas from thousands of years ago planted the seeds of democracy. In fact, I've got an interview with Adi Kushin or Cashin, I forget. It's on my blog, where we actually talked about that. Like we talked about where did the ideas of equality come from in Western civilization. And so, yeah, like I think Jordan's exactly right. And a lot of the atheists, they don't understand what Jordan is saying when he's saying, well, I know you say you're an atheist, but you're not acting like one. Like you're acting like there is an objective higher set of values. You're just not verbally acknowledging that that's what you're doing. So I've been paying attention to these kind of debates for about 25 years. I completely understand what he's saying, but they seem to just not get it. So there's Matt Dillahunty, and he says something like, well, Jordan Peterson's trying to tell me I'm not really an atheist. He's saying, well, you're not acting like one, because an atheist assumption is that it's just matter and it's just materials, and like nobody actually acts as though that's true. And then they kind of construct a story as to why it would be true anyway. But anyway, I'm probably getting off track at this point. So I don't know. Was that entertaining?
Yeah, it was great.
Well, I want to use it. I think I want to get a transcript. I told Fancher just the other day, I want to do a newsletter where we talk about AI. Because I think total distraction, and nobody understands the real dangers better than somebody whose business failed because they got Google slapped. That is the signature problem of AI right there. Is it's the person in the control room going, I don't want to deal with the messiness and complexity of who's really good and bad, so we're just going to invent a rule and we're just going to kill everybody on this side of a dotted line. And I mean, I witnessed tens of thousands of businesses just getting wiped out in one fell swoop because of that.
Yeah.
And it was this mix of government regulation and fear of the Federal Trade Commission and fear of government regulators and the Obama administration. And so, like, I mean, I don't know if you know this history, but, you know, back in, well, it happened several times, but it really got bad around 2009, not long after Obama came into office. And Google got fined $500 million for allowing illegal Canadian pharmaceutical companies to advertise in the United States drugs at Canadian prices. Okay? $500 million fine. And then there was something else. There was another fine for something. And basically, what the US government did was they said, we can hold Google responsible for the sins of their advertisers. So we're going to do that. Then we only have one person to watch instead of a million. So Google had to protect their backside. You know, it's not too good for the share price when you get $500 million fines, right? So Google concocted a set of guidelines for what they considered to be a scammy web page. It was, well, if you're making guarantees and if you're making promises, and if it has anything to do with money or health or like all these things, well, that's just going to be illegal from now on. So if you're in the health space, you can't make any promises and you can't make any guarantees. Even if your cream makes the rash go away, like you can't, right? Or even if your real estate deal really does make money, if you do the stuff, you can't promise anything. And if you do, we'll just shut down your AdWords account. Well, there you go, man. Like signature, like this is bureaucracy.
It's like a black swan for those that are involved in it, and it could happen at any moment. Even though if you've seen the pattern in the past, you know what happened with Google AdWords. You know when it's Google and you're in the cloud, the same sort of thing is going to happen, which makes it not a black swan to those who see that pattern, but those who are living inside of it, it would be.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, so I'll be very interested to see what kind of conversations this stimulates. Yeah, like this is a whole, boy, it'd be really interesting to see like 1 year from now what kind of conversations we're having. I think this is the real conversation. What we've been talking about, this is the real stuff. I think all that other stuff is just a circus show. And who knows what, like, I mean, Elon Musk very well may believe that AI is going to wake up and all of that. I mean, I understand lots of people believe that. I'm not saying that everybody is consciously trying to distract us from the real problems, but they are distracting us from the real problems, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think he's kind of on the fence of whether it will wake up or not, but he's, more in line of it's everything, what you said is it depends on who's using it. It will be used as a weapon, right? And so that's the kind of thing that he's worried about, right? So I wonder to what extent it's a of the atom bomb, right? I mean, lots of people have the atom bomb. It's only been used twice. So to what extent, as long as humans are in control, do we actually, even bad humans, decide not to do something completely fatalistic?
Well, I think the pivotal issue in all of this is free speech. And this is why Jordan Peterson has just been catapulted to such visibility. I mean, wow. I mean, I watched one of his videos 3 or 4 years ago, and I could tell, I mean, I didn't think a lot about it really, but he was a memorable guy, and I could tell that he had a very small, loyal cult following at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But then, you know, I've watched the thing take off. Well, free speech is the signature issue of, do you have the right to say what you want to say? So China is just tightening the screws down on free speech, and most of us didn't think they could ever pull it off, but they did. They did the Great Firewall of China, and they've managed to police the whole thing, and they've managed to turn the whole entire country into a surveillance state. And I have a friend who got he was in India doing Christian mission work, and guys with machine guns marched him to the airport and flew him to Sri Lanka and made sure that when he left Sri Lanka that he wasn't going back to India. So there's no free speech in China or India, and that's a third of the world's population right there.
Mm-hmm.
So
I guess the interesting
sleep
thing
with one eye open.
I guess the interesting thing is to what extent it's and how it's different in how it plays out when it's government imposed versus when it's imposed by, you know, the big four powerful corporations. Like what is the difference of that's a really fundamental question. I mean, I haven't thought about that enough, right? But which way does it go? So, or
Well,
is it any different?
I think the beginning of the answer to that question is just understanding algorithms. Okay. And anybody who's written one or works with one, or like even, you know, playing with Photoshop or that photo editor that's on your Mac, well, there's always dials that they can turn, right? So they can measure all of this stuff, right? And they can't measure it perfectly, but they can at least get it on 80-20 graphs, and they can get it on you know, bell curves and stuff. And they can always sit there, and they can pick something. They can always tilt the playing field at will. There's always somebody behind a control panel who can do that and does do that, right? So if somebody at Facebook said, "Oh well, I don't think Trump supporters have a right to be heard in the world," and since we can identify with great accuracy who all the Trump supporters are, I can make sure that all those people get 10% less likes, and nobody will know.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody will know. Nobody can prove it. And there's rules in information theory and algorithmic theory that explain why. Like, it's not possible to know the settings of the machine from the inside of the machine. And anybody on Facebook is inside the machine, not outside the machine. So,
yeah,
like, who knows how much social engineering is going on?
Yeah,
but I guarantee it's going.
And there's like this micro paradox, because you talk about the death of CNN, it's the death of Fox. You know, people are no longer watching those things because you can't get points across in 30-second sound bites, and so there's a migration to podcasts, for example, or YouTube, where Joe Rogan can have a 2.5-hour podcast on there, but that's YouTube. So Google owns that. So to what extent can they actually when I open YouTube, my recommended viewing for you is no longer Jordan Peterson or, something else based on what I like, but based on what the algorithm, what you're saying, wants me to like, right? So it's
Right.
like there's potentially no difference between the two. It's just a different media and a different format. But whereas someone at CNN is turning those dials and saying, what's going out there, potentially Google can be doing the same thing. Even though I can choose what content I want to watch, if I'm not, they can decide what becomes most salient for me to actually view versus what I have to search for.
So remember our conversation about which column of the spreadsheet are you going to sort by? Right?
Yeah.
That is the fundamental question of Google, Facebook, YouTube, Amazon, Apple. That's it. There is a spreadsheet and it has to be sorted by something. And somebody is deciding how it's being sorted. Is it being sorted by money? Is it being sorted there's a million things you can optimize for. Anybody that's gone deep into marketing analytics and sales funnels knows are we optimizing for impressions? Are we optimizing for clicks? Are we optimizing for opt-ins? Are we optimizing for short-term customer value? Are we optimizing for long-term customer value? Are we optimizing for social media likes and shares? Are we somebody's deciding.
What if there's a way?
Who is it? And what are they doing? Who are they accountable to?
What if there was a way where you optimize for, if we're all linked into the cloud some way, like through our emotions or something else, it's optimized for various emotions. Like right now, there's just a bandwidth problem where you can't, the algorithms can't tell exactly what's happening in your brain. They can only tell based on your behavior, right? And that's what Elon Musk is talking about. It's like a bandwidth problem with us being true cyborgs, right? Right now, you have to do stuff on your phone in order for that feedback to occur. But if it were a bigger bandwidth and your emotions were actually involved and linked into it somehow, then Google and Facebook could be optimizing for the emotions of love versus fear, or community versus.
Well, they could, but it doesn't really change it, right? So you still have. This goes back to Jordan's and Sam's argument about optimizing for well-being, and Jordan says, define well-being. And nobody can define it.
Yeah.
Right? Like in your life, look, there are people that optimize for happiness in the present moment, and they become drug addicts. There's people that optimize for the next 100 years, and they become great grandpas, that their grandchildren love to go to their house, right? It's like, okay, if individual human beings can't hardly figure this out, how is Alphabet Corporation going to figure this out, right? So, man, there's more questions than answers. I mean, I guess that's the point here is and we're just we're running pell-mell into the future.
Yeah, if you this kind of gets into the element, into the realm of faith, right? But if you have the faith that things basically get better and over time progress in the direction of love, or whatever you might want to call it, there are going to be peaks and valleys. And from an anti-fragile perspective, there are going to be horrible things that happen, like the horrors of the 20th century. But over time, you need those shocks in order for things to actually progress upwards. And so on a micro level, things may go up and may go down, but over time, if you have the faith that things ultimately get better, and there's a fundamental drive which every organism has, then the organism as a whole has the same thing. It just may not, it just depends over what time period you view things.
Well, I get what you're saying, but you know, I think World War I and World War II were totally unnecessary. Okay, like, you know, you can uh I think I don't think there's any guarantee that you're not going to have massive catastrophes. I was talking to George Church about this at Harvard about a month ago. He's one of my prize judges, and he's the leading geneticist at Harvard Medical School. And we had a sit down for about an hour, and mostly what we talked about was, well, what could go wrong in the world? Like, genetic engineering is one thing that could go wrong in the world, but like, it's not the only thing, you know. So we talked about that, and well, like, if you have kind of a mechanical faith that the world is just going to keep getting better, I think that turns a blind eye to the real struggle between good philosophies and bad ones. And there's no guarantee that the good philosophy is always going to win out. You know, we still got a whole bunch of people that think Marxism is a good idea, even though we've got 100 million dead bodies to testify that it was a really bad idea, right? And, you know, there's been entire bodies of knowledge and scientific discoveries and everything that have been lost. They've just been lost. There's many more that have been almost lost, but just barely resurrected from the dead. You know, like symbiogenesis theory, for example, which Lynn Margulis popularized in the 70s and 80s, and she eventually vindicated herself. And I got a podcast about this. Well, you know, symbiogenesis theory was fully developed by the 1920s, and it was almost completely lost. And so this can happen. Like, evolution is not guaranteed. And what some people think is evolution is really de-evolution. So I think it's very tricky. And if you have faith that life is just going to get better and better and better, that really is just faith.
Well, I don't mean that it's going to get better and better and better without any major downsides. Like, I'm not saying that. Like, I believe there's going to be some catastrophe is going to happen. We don't know what it's going to be. Some black swan will happen in the next 10 years, maybe this next year. Like, no doubt about any of that. But my philosophy is that, like, humanity as a whole is anti-fragile to the extent that we can actually learn from and improve on those philosophies and use them as operating systems moving forward. That's my viewpoint, but I don't, you know, by any means think that, you know, there isn't going to be catastrophes, because it's history. It's like, you know, the Will and Ariel Durant book of the lessons of history. So, you know, those, I 100% believe those things, but that, you know, overall, you know, wolves may die, but the pack survives kind of philosophy.
Well, just a little anecdote. I'm reading this book that Derek Dearden gave me, and I can't remember the title right off the top of my head, but there's this archaeologist talking about how they had essentially modern plumbing and flush toilets on the island of Crete 3,000 years ago. And people think that they were invented in the British Empire, and that actually, no, they had it 3,000 years ago, and they lost it. And so, boy, you know, Brian Todd made a great comment the other day. He said, human societies have lived for thousands and thousands of years without technology. But no technological society can live without the ancient stories and narratives, which essentially is what it's really what Jordan Peterson is about, is that there's these very fundamental archetypal stories. You know, Brian's been reading Aesop's fables, most of which are these little tiny short little, some of them are a paragraph, you know. And so, well, I mean, this is why we have this whole pre-Gutenberg thing in Planet Perry, is if you have your arms around some of this really old stuff and you're not you're actually elevating it above the modern, right? So what is the Renaissance time practice? It's cell phone goes over here, and ancient literature, like you start with the ancient literature, not with the technology, right? And I think like that's like a really fundamental fractal cultural, like, this is how we prioritize things. We always prioritize the ancient knowledge, so the technology is subject to the ancient knowledge, and then we won't do something really stupid with it. And that's how the pack survives. Actually, we could destroy the whole entire pack with one push of one button. It'll be over, right? So, you know, let cooler heads prevail. Well, this has been great.
Yeah.
And it's all on video, so that's great. Maybe I'll take a look at it. Maybe we'll use it. I'll ask your permission before we do that. So.
All right, Perry. Sounds good. Take
See ya.
care. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.